Funding for Current Conversations is provided by the University of Oklahoma President's Office, the OU Office of Student Affairs, OU Outreach, and World Literature Today. Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm R.C. Davis-Indiano. Today we're going to be talking with Danny Glover. He's made over 100 films, and he spent his adult life working on behalf of the poor and the disadvantaged. We'll also be talking with Dolores Huerta, the legendary organizer of the United Farm Workers in the 1960s. Join us for this fascinating conversation with two real-life heroes who are making a difference in so many people's lives. Do you ever find yourself getting kind of shocked when you look back over the body of work that you've done? Last count, I counted 100 plus films, and you've done, that's just for starters. You're a stage actor, you've done so much. Do you ever look back and just say, my goodness, did I do all of that? It's just such a huge body of work.
I think sometimes you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, was that really me? You know, the idea of becoming an actor was not something where there was a straight line to it from the first time I ever stepped on stage before, when I was 20 years old. So it took for me a way of introducing myself to the idea of a livelihood, one, and finding something of value and importance in what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And once I discovered the writing and voice of Ethel Fugard, the great South African player.
Yeah.
I think I've had that, what I consider to be the kind of initiation of my calling. And there's no idea, once you take on any of this, what the outcome is.
You are so involved in causes outside of the film industry. You are truly a social activist. These aren't just, you don't do lip service. You go out there and really you've given so many causes over the years, your time and your talent. How do your fans react today? Do they kind of keep a separation? There's Danny Glover on the screen and there's Danny Glover, the activist?
I don't know how they really respond to that. Some of them will come up to me. More often, they'll say that I like your work as an actor, mm-hmm. And on many occasions, people say I like your work as an actor, but I especially like your work as an activist. Yeah. But I can imagine that there's some duplicity in how people, or ambiguity in how people feel about me. You know, I could probably, you know, people could say, you know, yeah, I like him as Ethan Webb, but all that other stuff. You know what I'm saying? And that could be, but, you know, I think I don't take a survey or ask my publicist what I should say or what I shouldn't say. I may ask them how I should say what I want to say, and very issues and circumstances that are very controversial. But that's not that's not how I believe I should be. You know, I'm a citizen. I was a citizen before I was any of this other stuff that I became, whether it was working for community development or an actor. And I believe that my responsibility as a citizen is something that, you know, that I do not abdicate.
Let me switch gears a little bit and get you to talk a little more politically, if you don't mind. You know, somebody could say that there's a really unique crisis right now. The Republican Party, the Democratic Party, they did not see the protest vote coming. They just apparently were so out of touch. Trump and Sanders, what they represent in the culture seems to have just gone right by the two major political parties. How do you read that? Are you concerned about that as a citizen, that the two major parties seem to be just really out of touch with working people?
Well, I think the question with all the statistics that are available and all the forecasting that's available, that they understood without a doubt through various protests, whether the Occupy movement or whether it's Black Lives Matter, the color change, the resistance to all the other initiatives that come out of that, and the ongoing the wars, especially since over the last 13 years, or you can make an argument of since 9/11, that a lot of resources have gone to or most notably, even more, since the bubble burst that led to the Great Recession.
The Great Recession.
And all that people, so on the sense that people are scratching their heads, even though the bubble itself was just that, an illusion, an economic illusion of wealth, an over-exaggeration of value, wealth, and everything else, what the bubble was and everything else. So on the one hand, I think that people reacted and responding to that, and to see, and the fear that drives people, one, for those people who watched this charade around NAFTA, WTO, the deindustrialization and outsourcing of jobs, those are real issues that affect people's lives. In a sense, and on one hand, those retired people, the attacks on Social Security, the attempt to cut Social Security, all those things that people become afraid of, you know what I'm saying? And certainly it's been marched out there in the propaganda about around policy and how policy would respond to those. So I think there's the politicalization there, and I think that took it over the top was the fact that millennials and people graduating from college saying, how am I going to pay these loans back? Those who will benefit, let alone that we know that the judicial system is broken by the privatization of prisons, the mass incarcerations of people of color, the prison, the school, the prison pipeline, community, all those things that have become a part of people's of popular culture or popular expression. So you use those terms. Those terms may not have been available for us some time ago, but they're available for us now, and they permeated the whole process, the whole system on levels of communication there. And so what do we have is this disconnect, and that people are hurting, and both of these parties, which are funded by people with enormous wealth, and everything else, that some people are going to have to stand up and say something. And I think that they may have known clearly what the objective situation of living people were, everyday people were, their living and everything, living conditions and everything, but they didn't accept the fact that it would manifest itself in a particular candidacy.
One read that people give the current situation is that the Republican Party has not represented working people for a long time, and for the last 30 years, the Democratic Party has focused on the upper professional class, and basically working people have just been left without any voice at all.
Well, you could make this process of disenfranchisement and abandonment gone on longer than that.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make the accusation at the very moment. We had at the end of World War II, more than 40% of the workforce was unionized. More than 40%. Workers, unions had won the right to form unions, and had won the rights to bargain collectively. Those things were happening they also signed into law with Roosevelt, and that every movement, everything from the Taft-Hartley Law in 1947, which essentially criminalized union or organizing and further criminalized it. From those moments on, the history itself, the bright moment within that was the civil rights movement and those things that came out of the civil rights movement, Roe versus Wade, the women's liberation movement, all those things that came out of there. But at the same time, both of those things would happen or emerge within a framework when what people would call the golden years of capitalism, 1945 to 1975, when basically the U.S. was rebuilding all the world. So there's a lot of history around this. But when we see the moment, we see it within the framework of the immediacy of our personal lives, our short personal lives. Because you look at 1975, that's 40 years ago.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Over 40 years ago.
A lot of people listening to you right now might say, yeah, but that's Danny Glover. He's got a microphone out to the culture. He can influence people. And they want to do something themselves. What's the one thing you could say to people?
There's so many ways in which what we understand and how we can act as citizens, whether it's their participation individually. Danny Glover, not only, I don't build organizations, but I support organizations. I'm not the one who's going to say, let's start this or that or that. In occasions there will be our part of a constituency which does that particular thing. But I'm going to say at the same time, where am I at in the discourse? Where am I at in this and changing the narrative? The narrative has to be changed. What does the narrative have to be changed? If you're saying that you can't do anything about inequity or struggling against inequity, why don't we find a way in which you can participate in those organizations that do something about it, and they do something about it in their individual communities. If we're going to change climate change, it's not going to be by some amazing national edict that says we're going to do this in climate change. It's going to be how people resist and everything else. But Danny Glover might have a mic and everything, but Danny Glover is going to be affected by the same things you are if we're talking about climate change.
One last question, and again, I'm going to ask you to kind of stick your neck out a little bit. Can you make a prediction for the next 10 or 20 years, something good or bad that you think will happen in regard to race in this country?
I would think, being an eternal optimist, that where we are right now, is that we reached a point where we thought we were in a post-racial moment with a black president, but we certainly are not. Right. That we come to the realization, my prediction, we come to the realization and begin to build the beloved community that Dr. King.
More self-understanding of ourselves as a culture and a community.
As a community and transformation. The idea is still transformation, whatever it is. People go through religious transformation. Why can't we go through social transformation and human transformation, real human transformation?
Danny Glover, we're out of time. Thank you so much for being with us today. Right. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you very much. All right.
Dolores Huerta, welcome to Current Conversations. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
I think you're kind of a modest person. However, I have to say, if I think about the Latino world and really America pre-Dolores Huerta and pre-Cesar Chavez, et cetera, and post what you did with United Farm Workers in the 1960s and 70s and really beyond that, it's a different world now. Do you ever find yourself reflecting back and think, my goodness, we walked on the stage of history and really helped to change the world?
No, I think about it a lot because sometimes people will ask me, well, do you see a difference? Of course you see a difference. I remember when I went to college, there was a handful of us Latinos in college, and some of my friends actually changed their names, like Estrella became Cruz. They anglicized their names. Martinez became Martin because they were not, really identifying or being proud of who they were. And so, you fast forward to today's world, now where you have many of the institutions that are what they call Hispanic serving institutions, where you have maybe half or even half of the population at a college will be Latinos. And we see this throughout the country, not just in the Southwest, but in New York City, in New York State. I was just at a conference there. And then you see all of these organizations of Latino teachers, Latino engineers, Latino doctors, all of these, and Latinas also, Latina lawyers organizations. So there's been a tremendous amount of progress that has happened in the last few years.
But if I can take you backward just a second, I think you met Cesar Chavez in a community service organization in the 60s. What were the aspirations that you and he had at that point? What did you think you were doing at the time?
Well, our purpose was to organize people in their own communities so that they could go forward and help, erase some of the discrimination that was going on. And not only in their own communities, like, fighting school issues, racism issues in the community, but also to start dealing at the state and national level. I remember we were very active in passing laws to get ballots in the Spanish language in California, to get driver's licenses in people's ethnic language. We passed a very important law way back in 1961 to remove the citizenship requirement so that people could get public assistance. Later on, with United Farm Workers, we passed unemployment insurance for farm workers, the right to organize. So we worked at the local level to strengthen communities so that they could then influence their legislators and their congresspeople, so that we could, we passed a law, when you think about this, to make it mandatory that employers throughout the United States have toilets in the fields for their workers, which they didn't have.
These were big gains.
Yeah, but it was all done with the workers themselves organizing and putting pressure on their legislators to make these things happen.
Was there ever a moment where you and Cesar realized this could be transformative? We could be changing the culture of the United States. This could have huge implications, or were you just so busy changing the world around you, you didn't need to reflect? Which was it?
I think we were, just trying to get people organized, getting them involved, making them understand that they had the power to make changes, and that's what our purpose was. I don't think we were thinking of ourselves in any kind of a historical context. I think other people that were working with us could see that, but we were just so busy organizing that wasn't one of our thoughts.
Yeah, because now I think of you as somebody who's walked on the stage of history and has made really big things happen. What was Cesar Chavez like? What was it like to work with him? You were the co-leaders of the United Farm Workers.
Well, Cesar was a very humble person. He didn't really like a lot of attention. He was embarrassed by it. When people would shout "Viva Chavez," he would just cringe, He just wasn't used to that. And because he felt that, a lot of the credit belonged to the workers that were doing the work. They were the ones that were making things happen. And so he was very humble in that respect. Really followed Gandhi, the precepts of Gandhi, the whole idea of voluntary poverty, the idea of nonviolence, and of course he committed his life to doing that with his, in a very physical way by the long fast that he did.
The fast that he did.
Yeah, he did 3 fasts. He did the first one in 1968 for 25 days, and then in Arizona for 72 days, another water-only fast, and then the last one was for 36 days.
Those probably destroyed his health, don't you think?
Well, that's hard to say because Cesar actually was not ill when he passed away. He died in his sleep, and it was a very natural death. And the interesting thing about, because his parents lived to be almost 100 years old. His dad was 101, and his mother was just a couple of years short of 100.
After all that you did, all that happened in those days, we wouldn't really. The working poor are still there. We're not where we want to be. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I guess I would agree with that. I think the conditions for farm workers have improved. We know we have, as we talked before, a lot of Latino professionals, and even farm workers, have their kids in the Ivy League colleges all over the country, and that's wonderful, to know that. But we know that because of the stagnation of wages, the assault on labor unions in the United States of America. You now have 26 states that have right to work laws, which make it very difficult for unions to organize because they can't collect the dues from workers from their paychecks, right? Which makes it easy for them to be able to fund the organizations. And so it's been very difficult. And I think that there's been an attack on labor unions specifically, and that, of course, affects all workers, and it also affects the formation of a middle class in the United States.
I'd like to ask about you personally, if you don't mind. Now, you've been arrested when you've been involved in peaceful protests and marches some 22 times, right? That must get old, getting arrested. What was that like? I mean, how do you view that?
Well, initially, we were arrested because we were trying to talk to workers, going to the fields, and for trespassing. Or sometimes we would just go out there and they would arrest us before we would get a chance to go into the field to talk to workers. And some of my more recent arrests have been kind of in solidarity of other movements. I was arrested with the LGBT community in San Francisco when they were trying to bring in more medicines, the prescriptions that they needed that were, being blocked by the government, And then I was arrested with casino workers who were trying to organize in the casinos and were being denied the right to organize, and then also arrested with the Retail Clerks Union. And so some of my arrests have been in support of other organizations.
Okay, getting arrested is one thing, but I recall in September of 1988, we're in San Francisco right now, and in Union Square, very close to this hotel, you were beaten by police when you were part of a peaceful protest against, I think, some of the policies of President Bush, and you almost died. I mean, they really went after you. They put you in the hospital.
Right. That was the first Bush, and it was interesting that while we were out there protesting, because he had said that there was nothing wrong with pesticides, that the government takes care of us, and we don't have to worry about that. And at the same time, there were farm workers that were dying of cancer, farm worker children, a very, very high percentage of them dying of cancer. And we were doing actually it called for an additional third great boycott to bring attention to the pesticides on our food. And that's what Caesar's Last Fast was about also. It was about calling attention to the poisons on our food.
Maybe it's a definition of leadership that you're able to sustain that faith, which you've obviously been able to do over a lifetime. That's really impressive. Almost any look at the national scene right now would tell us that the country desperately needs to talk about race in so many ways. And yet the discussion that never seems to happen is the discussion of race. Any reflections on that? Why is race the most uncomfortable topic in America?
I think this country was built on racism. When you think about what we did to the Native Americans, to African slaves, to the Asian people, the Oriental Exclusion Act, the internment of the Japanese, during World War II, even though there was no evidence of any kind of sabotage by the Japanese community. So we just got layers and layers and layers of wrongdoing. It's like the Howard Zinn history of the United States of America. And so the Bracero program, where Mexicans were brought in and they were almost treated like slaves, where they were worked with very little wages for the work that they did. So I think we've just got so many layers of slavery. I think there's a huge amount of guilt. And I think we don't really want to admit that we've done this, and people try to ignore it. And the racism justifies some people keeping their power, people keeping their power because they can always, I like to say, like they kept the farm workers without toilets or drinking water, with a shorthand hold. The people that feed is to put the food on our table, and they're not respected and they're not acknowledged. And somehow this justifies people, being able to make profits off of workers, and not acknowledging the workers that really build the wealth of the country. And so I think there's a lot of guilt involved in that. And so I think somehow we've got to figure out a way to do some kind of reconciliation, just like they did in South Africa, so that we can say to people, well, you don't have to feel guilty,
Truth and reconciliation.
Yeah, truth and reconciliation, but we've all got to identify this issue. We've got to acknowledge that racism exists and that people are getting killed because they're black or brown, and people are being mistreated, people are being incarcerated, the whole immigration issue. It's not about people crossing the border. It's about building prisons and saying that you have committed a crime when crossing the border is not a crime. It's a civil offense, you know. So there's profits that are being made out of racism. And so, you know, we've got to identify this and acknowledge it, and then say to everybody and to all of our institutions and our government agencies, everybody here has got to take a position and to start acknowledging and start working to end the racism.
Try to look out 10, 20 years into the future, if you would. Make a prediction of something that will impact the Latino community, good or bad, but you think is really looming on the horizon out there in the next 10 or 20 years that people could look for.
I see the Latino community playing a much more powerful role in the United States of America and in our own country. But also when you talk to many of the students, and I always ask them, what are you majoring in? And so many of them are majoring in international studies, you know. And I see that a lot of our young people coming out of the colleges are going to be more involved in international politics. And because I think they understand the ramifications and the implications of a global world. And that's what I see in the future, that so many of our young people they're much more visionary, I think, than a lot of the rest of us are. And so I think the Latino community is going to have a very powerful role in the in the future of the United States of America. And we've always had a role, I think, in the history, but now in the future of the United States of America.
A bigger role.
A bigger role, and I think more links with Latin America. And I think we're going to be learning from Latin America. We're going to be learning from Cuba. Now that we have a relationship with Cuba, people say, wow, how are the Cubans able to do all these incredible things like having free health care for every citizen, free education for every citizen, and yet be able to maintain their country, when they're a very, very poor economy that's had a boycott, economic boycott on this country. But our young people are very open and curious, and they all want a better world because so many of their families have suffered so that they could have an education and create a better world.
I like your vision.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Dolores Huerta, thank you so much for being on Current Conversations. Thank you for being here.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for being with us. Join us next time for more Current Conversation. Thank you for watching.